It's not the pale moon that excites me, that thrills and delights me. Oh no, it's just the nearness of you.
Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of the Nearness of You podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Noel. Tonight's guest is quite new to Sasquatch research, but just like Angeli's Sasquatch in our last episode, he has already been extremely productive. He is the first that I know of to identify a very consistent feature in Sasquatch structures, which he calls steeples, and you'll see examples of these. Also in our conversation, the practice of peeling limbs and branches comes up again, and even more emphatically than in our last episode. Our guest offers a fresh angle on why Sasquatch seem to build their structures so close to human civilization. Moreover, he is one of the first that I know of to have recognized gathered structural elements on the ground and later to find them incorporated into the nearby structure. Lastly, we cover something that he found last spring, the most remarkable structure that I've ever seen documented, and this one not made out of wood.
And I feel you so close.
Well, I want to welcome you, Kev is Squatchin, to the podcast, and it's been my great pleasure to follow you for the last few months as you've been working hard on research in the forests around where you live in Utah. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
You found more than 100 structures off in deeper in the forest, and you've documented a lot of these on your excellent YouTube channel called Kev is Squatchin. But for purposes of this podcast, can you talk a little more about how you first discovered signs of activity close to your house in this microforest?
Right. So I've been walking around this path. It's a paved path, but I've been walking that since I've moved here. I've lived in this house for 6 years now, and I have always walked around the path there because it's next to the river, and it's really beautiful. And I started to notice, as soon as I started to learn and kind of research Sasquatch, independently, I was taking my walks with my kids and my dog, not really thinking about Sasquatching because it was next to my house. And I started to see tree leans, and then I started to see X's. And I thought to myself, how cool would that be if that really was a tree lean and really was a Sasquatch?
But what are the chances that could possibly be true? That's the same exact thing I thought when I found a whole bunch of structures behind my mother's house last spring. And my mother lives in a little neighborhood, part of the city of Montpelier, Vermont, the capital city. And there's a microforest behind her house, and I found just an abundance of structures, and you second guess yourself, but there it is. People are just increasingly, day by day, finding these things close to our civilization, and it's so counterintuitive and so fascinating, and we need to become aware of it, and people like you are spreading that awareness, and I'm so grateful.
Like I said, it's a hard thing to really understand, and I kind of just brushed it off. I thought, maybe that just fell down and wedged between the top of that wide tree, I guess. And maybe that X is just, I just couldn't believe it. And so what happened was they kept leaving more sign and more signs.
So how big is this microforest, and how far from you?
Oh, it's about half a mile long and a quarter mile wide. It's kind of an oval shape. It takes me about 5 or 10 minutes to walk. I'd say it's half a mile. I mean, maybe a mile.
And is it close to other houses, closer than to you?
Right. There's houses between my house and the microforest. And then the next thing that happened was the teepee that really nailed me. When the first teepee popped up, really stopped me dead in my tracks. It's like I couldn't deny it, because I looked at the construction. I looked at the wide branches in it, and the beautiful smooth branches stripped of bark, and perfect lengths, all broken. And it was so sturdy. The final product of that teepee was actually so sturdy I could grab onto the support beams and hang on it. And there was no rope or anything in there.
Wow.
So when that teepee popped up, it really...
And when you say popped up, you mean it, because you would visit this place at least once a week, if not more frequently. And this thing just was not there one day, and then the next time it was all there. That's exactly right. It stayed there for a while, and then the next thing that I noticed happened was there was a collection of really nice branches, all stripped of bark, kind of waiting there nice. Isn't that amazing how frequently they strip the bark? And this to me is one of the telltale signs, because human beings aren't likely to bother to painstakingly take off the bark, which would take a long time. And Sasquatch do seem to do it. We see this all over North America and in Australia and in Russia and et cetera, et cetera. Our best guess that I've ever heard of is that it helps the limbs and branches to dry out more quickly, because the bark will keep in the moisture, and the wood will rot. Whereas if you strip the bark, it retards the rotting process. So you found this pile, and it stayed there for a while?
I'm not exactly sure how long, but I mean a week, maybe 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden I noticed the piles were gone, and then I looked just almost with glee at the teepee, and they were all in it. They were all built in it. They had gone from the ground and in piles to built into this teepee.
Isn't that amazing? And both vertical and horizontal?
Both vertical and horizontal. And they put looked like 12 or so branches right above the door horizontally.
Like a lintel.
Right. Yeah. It's so interesting. I've seen that before.
Isn't that glorious? So, I mean, and Leanne Carnegie finds those horizontals a lot in her spots in Ontario.
She does. It's so fun to talk with Leanne and compare notes.
I know.
Because we're finding things so often that it's just so much fun.
And you're like 1,200 miles apart or something.
I know, and they're so similar, I found this fort that it's built in a half circle, and it's about 4 feet tall, and it's kind of weaved together. And I didn't know what to think of it, because there was actually kids in it playing, and so...
And 99.9% of people would say, oh, well, therefore, kids built it.
Yeah, and it wasn't anything like I'd been finding out deep in the forest, out on horseback or anything like that, so I didn't really film it. Plus, it was so close to home that I didn't think much of it. But then I just could not get over the fact that some of the branches and bushes in there had been just uprooted. They still had dirt in it, and they were weaved in together. And they actually, whoever built it, interlocked the branches together in between two trees.
So they just came between exactly two like you found elsewhere.
And interlocked it.
Right.
And so I talked to the kids playing in it, and I said, hey, did you guys build this fort? It's pretty cool. Looks like a lot of work. They said, oh, no, we found it here. We just made it better.
And what you think they meant by that is they put these flags on it?
Yeah.
And it said a keep out sign?
Right, keep out sign.
That's so funny. Now, then you faced a dilemma whether to tell them who you think built it or not.
I thought about it, but I didn't want to...
You don't want to freak them out.
Yeah.
They're little kids. Come on.
Yeah, have fun.
I wouldn't.
And I think that's like Leanne and I have talked about, and I think she mentioned it in your podcast. I think that they like to have people playing and interacting with the structures themselves.
Yeah, Rio has made that point where he finds these structures right next to parks where kids play, and he has seen kids like you have playing in the structures, and he thinks it's possible the Sasquatch want to kind of create that experience where they can watch the kids playing in the structures they have built. That's another kind of mode of indirect interaction that they love to be able to generate. And so they can have contact with us, but not make it direct and threatening.
Yeah.
It's so amazing if they do that.
I think they do that. It's almost like a game of tag. And then another thing that I've also noticed so many times is a steeple piece. So there'll be one piece that goes right up and that's taller than the rest, almost like a centerpiece or a steeple.
Yeah, once you started pointing that out in your videos, this summer I began noticing the very same thing where I was going. And it was just a great confirmation of the consistency across North America. I mean, you're like 2,000 miles away from me. And I have the same exact designs in these structures that I'm finding. And it's just wonderful to begin to put our heads together. I mean, before the internet, people in our position weren't able to compare notes like this. It's such a lucky advance.
It is. It really helps. It really helps expand the field and knowledge. I was sitting in my biology class, and my professor was talking about edges and how the edges of forests have different animals and a little bit different. The trees are a little bit different because, you know, they absorb more wind, and the climate is just a little bit different.
And the habitats come up against each other, so there is a kind of a transitional zone.
Right. Mm-hmm. And she was talking about that, and my mind started thinking about Sasquatch, and I thought, oh my heck! I put it together, and I'm like, well, a lot of the structures that I found, a really high percentage of the structures I found, are on one edge or another, whether that be the edge of a forest and a meadow, or a river and a forest, a road in a forest, a field in a meadow, a path, a campground, the edge of a city. There's so many edges with Sasquatch structures in them that I personally have found that I just really, it kind of hit me. Why didn't I think of this before? But sitting in the biology class learning about edges, and I, put it together.
Yeah, I can't tell you the number of times I've been watching something that seems to be unrelated to Sasquatch, and then all of a sudden there's a connection that comes jumping out at me. It's just such a joy when that happens.
I know, it's really neat. I've actually had a lot of my learning happen that way.
I have a video called The Edge Preference, where I show that in my local microforests around Montpelier, Vermont, lots of times the structures will be right up against, right beside human civilization, and then you won't find any up farther. Even if it's a large forest, and you'd think they would spend time farther from people. No, they spend it right up, hugging up against us. If you can judge by the structures how much time they spend in a place, or where they want to represent themselves.
So the footprints that I found in the microforest aren't they're of a juvenile Sasquatch. So I almost wonder if they're coming down because it's exciting. Sneak down the river, pop up by the people, sneak into the forest, build a structure. In a way it would be kind of like counting coup. Native Americans during time of war would go up and tap the enemy. That was a way to show bravery and a little bit of control, if I believe. Is that correct?
That's what I remember too. That's a great connection.
I went back one day and the teepee was just completely gone, just completely disappeared. And I stood there just in shock because it was always such a delight to walk down there and see that beautiful teepee. And then I walked down there and it was just poof, gone. Well, of course I did some investigation and looked at the ground and, looked at all the signs and found that a truck had backed in there and basically loaded up all of the wood and taken it, all of the beautiful stripped branches and all of the Y branches and all of the things that they like to build with. So it was really heartbreaking for me, because they, not only was it destroyed, but it was gone. They didn't even leave those beautiful, the beautiful building material that was collected. And then it was really a disappointment, so I didn't go down there for a couple weeks. And then I went down again, and I saw them loading up trailers full of just fallen trees in there, using it for firewood, you can tell. And I was really disappointed in that. And then I went down there just within this last week and noticed that there was new buildings in there, new structures. And they built farther away from the river and closer to people. So they come down the river and they get out of the river, and then they go in this microforest and build. But after the teepee was destroyed, I was worried that they weren't going to come back, and I was wondering what was going to happen. And then I went down, and they had built closer to people. One of my research areas that I was just looking at researching early in the year, I had my eye on it from the sky, so to speak, with Google Earth, and I kept going up, and the gate was locked, and I kept driving up, and the gate was locked. And I drove up one day, and they were opening the gate, and so I was able to go in. And I went in and started looking around, and my kids were with me, and they were kind of playing by the car, and I started to hear a vocal. I had my dog with me as well, and what was interesting is they were piggybacking vocals off of my dog's voice.
Wow.
So my dog would bark, and about, 3/4 of the way before my dog's bark ended, they would put a vocal on it, and it was coming from the top of a hill. And so I decided to walk over there, and I walked off the path and kind of bushwhacked up this hill.
What did these vocals sound like? Was it sort of like the audio that you and Leanne captured?
Yeah, actually it was. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and come to think of it, that's the same area.
Ah.
Woo! So I went over on top of the hill, and I found a rock cairn. And it was the hill's bald at the top, and then there's a rock that's, it's more of a boulder, maybe 2 feet high and 3 feet wide, and it's pretty deep in the ground. Well, that's what the cairn was built on. And I thought that was
not
pretty
flat
incredible.
Ground.
Yeah, not even flat ground. And so I thought that was really incredible, because I bushwhacked. There was no trail there. And so I bushwhacked to the top, and on top of the bald hill, and on that boulder was built a cairn. And I just had the overwhelming feeling that it was Sasquatch, because number one, the place had just opened, and it was still spring. And so I thought it was Sasquatch, and so I told my friend Kathy about it, and she wanted to go see it, and so I took her up there. Well, when we got to the top of the hill, I actually said, "No way!"
How long? How much time later?
I think it was 2 days.
Oh, only 2 days. Oh my goodness.
Only 2 days.
Wow.
And that's what really blew me away. The main tower of a 3-tower rock cairn, the main tower was over 8 feet tall, balanced on that same rock.
And this thing is incredibly intricate.
It is incredibly intricate. The way it was balanced, it shocked me. I mean, I kind of gasped. I was like, no way. And I mean, because 2 days. Yeah. And I just couldn't figure out why in the world would someone, just since this gate is barely open, be coming up here, hiking to the top of this hill with a ladder to build an intricate
a step ladder,
rock
yeah.
cairn.
Well, and somebody could say, well, maybe it was there a long time ago, but this wouldn't survive a winter and the storms and the snow.
Well, I don't think even the little one would have survived that. And I watched the rock cairn, until it finally was dismantled. I won't say blown down, because it wasn't. Big rocks were farther away than small rocks, which was strange. And then I started leaving gifts there, and they took one, which was cool. I left a black carved penguin, carved in stone penguin, black and polished, at this rock cairn, and they didn't take that, yet they took the wolf that was red, that was also carved in rock.
Oh, interesting. All right, Kevin, I am so appreciative.
Oh, thanks.
Hold you ever so tight, and to feel